Couple of notes before our webinar starts today. We, as a reminder, we are recording our webinar, and the slides that the chief will show will be up on our website within about a week after the webinar. We generally run the webinar for about 20 minutes or so, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions related to the presentation itself or anything else that you might want to talk about with respect to 30 by 30 or women in policing, or if you have broader questions for Mesa. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chief Ed Wessing, who's going to talk you through some of the work that they're doing in Mesa, Arizona. One thing I will say from the get-go is Mesa was one of our early adopters. They were one of our agencies that joined very early on and have continued to work through items in the pledge and think through their commitment to 30 by 30. So one of the things that we often talk about is that this work is a long-term effort, long-term strategic effort. It's not necessarily something that you should just do and move on. So I'll raise that. The other thing I'll note quickly is we talk about the importance of having men do this work with us. And that's one of the reasons, super happy to have the chief with us today. I believe this is our first webinar hosted by a male. So I'm super happy to have you join us and to see so many folks on the webinar that are really supporting women in the workplace and women in policing. So a bit about Chief Wessing. He oversees the Community Service Bureau for the city of Mesa. If you're not familiar with Mesa, it's the third largest police agency in Arizona. His responsibilities include recruitment, community relations, human resources, wellness, and training. He has over 28 years of service, and he previously served in the U.S. Marine Corps for several years as well. So we're super happy to have you here, Chief. I am going to share the screen and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate that. Very kind words. I also have several members of my staff here that are actually joining us. So I'm sure if I miss a good point, they'll be sure to add something in the chat. It's actually a very interesting point that you bring up about male representation in these discussions. Like we talked yesterday, you know, I've been in numerous large-scale meetings at IECP, major city chiefs, and when I've attended those, I was somewhat surprised at the lack of representation of men in those rooms in leadership positions. And so I'm super happy to have an organization where, you know, 30 by 30 and other efforts that we have to bring all groups proper representation are supported not only by our chief, but the city as well. As a matter of fact, we consistently meet with them on our diversity overall and how it represents equally with the city that we serve. I think this is kind of an interesting time to talk about something more just recruiting and hiring, specifically as it relates to 30 by 30. And I do truly believe that if your recruiting and hiring efforts aren't congruent with training, you're somewhat wasting your time. What I mean by that is we went back over 20 years of data, we found that in the first 3 to 5 weeks of hiring, or excuse me, of training, 30 to 35% of our recruits just dropped out, typically citing reasons very similar of law enforcement's not for me. I looked at it even closer and found that a high percentage of those were women. And quite frankly, I don't think most people understand what law enforcement is in the first 3 weeks of the academy. And so we went back and really looked at how can we better prepare this precious resource that we work so hard to recruit and hire. How can we better prepare them for the academy setting and allow them an opportunity to be successful? And we came up with our police officer recruit pre-hire program. And I'll share, you know, some of the components of that. And at the end, there'll be some statistics and results that we're showing early on in the first couple years of implementation. You can move to the next slide. Well, I'll keep talking while the slide are being updated. Really, we looked at, you know, defining the program is where it should sit. And currently it sits in our hiring unit, which is problematic because our staff in hiring are busy working files. And so I can see a need down the road to add this, a specific unit to deal with this. But currently it's overseen by our hiring sergeant and some of the staff in our hiring unit, primarily one detective, and we've added a couple others that assist with the program. The focus on the program is preparing police recruits for the challenges they face. Initially, there was a little bit of pushback because I'm sure many of you experienced this paradigm where training wants to keep that experience secret. And they want our recruits to see it for the very first time when they show up on day one, thereby adding to that stress inoculation. We took a look at that and said, I think we can do a better job at preparing them both mentally, physically, and academically without giving out any secrets that they would discover. And so we're looking each academy class to build on to what we're doing. And if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of go over the program just a little bit. One of the things that the city of Mesa allows us to do, which I encourage every agency in the room to have this discussion with your leadership, is that allows us to hire these individuals months in advance of their academy. We currently run 3 academy classes a year, and so typically 3 months to 4 months out, as soon as they're identified as potential hires, we hire them. And in the Phoenix metro area, the competition is extremely tight, and we were losing people to other academies because they were hiring them sooner. That was our initial motivation to start this. But once we get them here into our department, we can start to really ingrain them into the culture of Mesa Police Department and really prepare them for what they're going to be undergoing in the academy. And the way it's set up now is they have daily group sessions with our staff, and it primarily is 2 to 3 hours a day, Monday through Thursday. Now, we have a 4-10 schedule here at Mesa PD. That's why it's Monday through Thursday. It includes physical fitness training, where they're really focusing on strength and cardio fitness. And also we cover various topics at this stage instead of in the academy, where we introduce emotional intelligence, financial literacy, wellness and stress management topics, as well as nutrition, which we often find is very problematic in the first few weeks of the academy, as well as grammar and writing. Our academy staff told us that one of the biggest challenges they have is the writing skills of some of our recruits. So we start to introduce grammar and writing skills, and then we farm them out throughout the department, almost as if they're in a transitional duty assignment to different areas to do whatever work needs to be done, because it is still important that they be productive. And then this goes on up until the academy starts, where then they're ingrained right into the academy structure. You can go to the next slide. Some of the benefits, and I've highlighted them here. I don't want to read every word. The first one I think is really important is building connections. These, as you know, in the academy, they come here as individuals, and typically it takes several weeks for them to start to work together as a team, which is really where they start to be successful. Well, here in the pre-hire program, they're already building and establishing those relationships. They start to show team camaraderie and working together. Something as simple as our recruits today that all text each other, and they're developing text groups where the questions are being asked, and they're actually working together. Honestly, they have shown such better preparation because it really gives them a head start. We're allowing them to study certain things like our 100 blocks, traffic laws, a lot of the things that require memorization that oftentimes creates more stress as they're tested on them in the academy. We're able to provide them in the pre-academy program. And, you know, we're looking at each time we do this to add more to it to ensure them that they're prepared, because it's difficult that you spend all this time to have a recruit fail tests in the first 3 to 4 weeks because the stress of that environment. And if we can prepare them beforehand, I think it's just an opportunity that we were missing. Something important to us is culture integration. Because they're assigned to different divisions and different areas of the department, they truly get to see from other employees, both sworn and professional staff, not only what the operations of the department are, but really what is the culture in the organization. This next one, injury prevention. and I really have to thank our staff for what they're doing here. We would have recruits show up on day one with footwear that certainly wasn't conducive to physical fitness. In this program, not only are they getting paid so they have the opportunity to purchase the right equipment prior to starting, but they're walking them through getting them ready, which is showing significant injury reduction in the academy. Specifically, what we see a lot: shin splints, knee issues, foot issues, back issues when they're doing dynamic exercises. They're really teaching them how to do the exercise events, but also as their body's adjusting to it, it's not a first hit on day one at the academy. I'm really looking forward to seeing over the next 3 years if we can continue to show fewer days missed because of injuries in our fitness program. And then finally, just the growth opportunities. As they get exposed to the different areas of the department, it really does, I think, cultivate some of the necessary skills that could help them be aligned with some future opportunities and roles in the organization once they do leave the academy. One of the things that we're doing now that's not in this program is it's also allowing us to kick off a mentoring program. And it's where we're assigning current employees from just a couple academies ago to these pre-hire recruits as they start the academy. So we're building in a mentoring program at the very onset of their training. You can go to the next slide. Some of the benefits that we see in leadership are dropout reduction. Because they're have, I think, a better understanding of the organization, and we have a better understanding of their strengths and weaknesses prior going to the academy, we can really adapt the pre-hire program to their individual needs, which further reduces, I think, that dropout or recidivism that I think all of us probably experience. We're also finding that less disciplinary issues in the academy, and I'll give you an example. And we talk about integrity and how in the academy and in law enforcement, it's absolute integrity. Well, we know coming from society that sometimes little white lies, our young people may not necessarily feel or believe the same way. And so we're able to have these discussions that in the academy, if you lie even about the most minor thing, you're going to lose your job. And so we're focusing on some of these issues that we would see recruits lose their job over from, violating academy rules or other misconduct, that we're preventing that by having those discussions in a non-academy setting. The side note is all these units that have these pre-recruits assigned to them, they love having the additional help because, quite frankly, most of them are happy to have a job. They're excited to be here, and they bring that positive energy and the additional assistance to these units. So it's a win around on the clock. And obviously, I mentioned this earlier, it's our ability to immediately hire these individuals that have demonstrated the skill set and the character that we believe would make a good officer in Mesa. Too often we would lose recruits to other agencies because they could hire them just a little bit quicker. And right now we're really just ahead of the curve that as soon as we can get them through the background process, we can hire them immediately. And our city supports that extra 2 to 4 months of salary because, quite frankly, the argument for me was they're already budgeted positions. And so that funds are already available. Huge benefit to us to do that. You can go to the next slide. I'll just touch on this briefly, but so far, since the implementation of the program, we've seen a drop rate for our police officer recruits in the academy go down 52% compared to classes that did not utilize a pre-hire program. 52% is a huge number. Now, typically we'll have 4 to 9 women that are in those academies. And if you think about that, losing 50% of those numbers, it's significant. What I'm hearing from my academy staff is that they perform better, which means that we're taking some of the stress off of them when they start. So they're taking on more information when we start to put them into scenario-based training, which we separate that in multiple modules in the academy. And the reason why they're saying they're performing better, because we also host other city police departments recruits in our academy that don't have the same program. and our recruits are much farther advanced than most of the other cities' recruits are because they haven't had the opportunity to spend time with them like we have. If you'll go to the next slide. We're really data-driven in our approach to our hiring, recruitment, and training strategy. So I wanted to share this this graph with you, and you can see it primarily. We really started the program with class 53. And you can see going back to class 46 a handful of years ago, our attrition rate was 32%. That's just in the academy. Since we started it, we're averaging 13 to 15%. Our last class was 14%. The current academy class that's almost halfway done is only at 9%. And the class, you'll see class 58, it just started this week. So certainly we haven't had anybody leave yet. As precious as these recruits are, this is a huge success for our organization in helping us meet our recruitment goals across the board. And I can tell you when I do go before council and I'm able to report on these efforts and the reduction of losing individuals, it's extremely successful and our city's very happy with those efforts. And I would guarantee that your cities or municipalities would feel the same way. I have one last slide to go over, and that's just our current program. This group that we just had, I took a picture of this group. This is in their pre-academy week this week. So they start officially the academy on Monday. I wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown of what our overall diversity is for this class. And I won't give you the specific numbers because you can read. Our goal is to try to appropriately match the community that we serve. And quite frankly, the only area that we're missing the boat on is with women. And that's why we're going to continue to push, to further these programs, much like 30 by 30, but you have to be intentional. You have to look at not only your hiring and your recruiting practices, but also your training practices that may be prohibitive, not only to women, but any other group that is misrepresented in your community. With that, I'll end the actual presentation, and both myself and I have several members of my staff would be willing to entertain questions either now or we'll put up our contact information. If you want to reach out to us afterwards, we're certainly available to answer those questions as well.
Chief, thank you so much for that presentation. It's really helpful to have an understanding of how Mesa is handling issues like this, and it's clear to see that you're successful, or you're making progress for sure with respect to the diversity and representation of your workforce. I'll start with one question. Is what were the main challenges that you had to implementing this program?
The biggest challenge is it's something different. And I think, there is somewhat of a culture in law enforcement training. I kind of mentioned it earlier that, we want to shock them as they show up at training. And when we really looked at the reasons why people were leaving in those first 3 weeks, again, they would mention, hey, law enforcement isn't for me. Then when we started to watch some of the videos of that training, it was hard to watch. And additionally, the academic issues that we're seeing, because generally when you talk to academia, if your individuals are so stressed they can't concentrate, they're not going to succeed with their testing process. So we really had to just admit that we wanted to do something different. And so the challenge is always to get all of your staff who actually are doing the work. Like I mentioned, the staff that I have here, they're the ones doing the work. And until they're fully engaged in the process, and quite frankly, this program is coming from them. So we know that we have their buy-in. Then we had to work with training to ensure that they also had the buy-in and could see the value in it. And honestly, we're getting to the point where it's a staffing issue for us because we put a lot of responsibility on a few people to maintain this program, which started with just a couple people. And now, as you can see, we had 34 recruits, and it's assigned to one sergeant and a couple people. That's a huge responsibility in addition to their daily responsibilities in a hiring unit. So that's our next hurdle, is try to properly staff this.
Thanks. That's really helpful. And folks, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat. Either way is fine.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
Sure. Hi, Lisa Wood. So I'm interested in the process that you talk about. So they're pre-hire recruits. So are you putting them through the entire hiring process as if you were for a normal police position, right? So they make it through that entire hire process. And then
That is correct.
And then are you bringing them into to the actual police officer position? Or are you bringing them into a different position while they are in the pre-hire recruit program? And do they then move into a police officer position once they go to the training academy?
So we bring them in, we have two classifications. It's the police officer recruit position
Mhm.
and the police officer position that they don't transition into until they graduate from the academy. So during the process, they are brought in at the police officer recruit position as if they were in the academy.
Okay, thank you. So two positions.
Chief, someone asked me, what was the representation of women when you joined the policing profession?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because there's one class in our history which matches the percentage of women representation in this class, and that was my class. It's class number 5 in January of 1996. Now, I don't know how that happened, because certainly the representation in the department wasn't where we are today. But the percentage that we're seeing today, as a matter of fact, my colleague, Assistant Chief Nesbitt, is the last remaining woman from that academy class, and she was a little bit disappointed that we broke that record, or at least matched it with our current academy class that's starting on Monday.
That's great. What do you see as like the biggest reasons that women in particular drop out of the academy or they don't make it through?
You know, it's hard to say, because we didn't do a really good job at doing interviews when they would leave. But I worked at the academy as a lieutenant. I was the commander out there. And quite frankly, I do believe myself, and I don't have data to support this, that a lot of it had to do with the physical fitness preparedness. You know, just the overall stress that was induced in the first 2 to 3 weeks. Our women recruits just decided that this wasn't for them. And those were their words. And so we really had to look at, we're not changing standards. It's the same standards, but how do we prepare them for the rigors of the academy, so when they get there, they know that they can accomplish and overcome and be successful. And I think that's what's unique to this program, is even internally, we have folks that will say that, oh, well, we're changing standards for women in this program. That's absolutely not true. We're preparing them for the standards that they're going to be held to in the academy.
Chief, I'm glad you raised that too, because that's sometimes a misconception about the 30 by 30 initiative. And we make it very clear to anyone that asks, we're not advocating for lowering standards at all in the policing profession. What we're advocating for is making sure that those standards are valid and that they make sense for the profession and that the people are engaged in. I have a couple of questions coming in to the chat. The first one from Tracy is, are you using social media to help advertise what you were seeking for in the additional representation of females in your agency?
You know, if I can, I'd like to have Sergeant Alicia Gibbs, who's our recruiting sergeant. She should be on here. The answer is yes, but I'd like her to answer that question, because she's primarily driving those efforts.
Yes, Chief. So I do think that it's a great opportunity to talk just about our website, ourjoymesapd.com. This last year, we did a series on just the family, and we talked about the work-life balance between women. And we featured 3 different females, different lengths in their careers, and they talked about how they joined this career and why, you know, what different jobs that they had. And then more importantly, we do have TikTok and we have Instagram, and we are constantly making reels on there, talking about different jobs that are in law enforcement. I think sometimes we have to de-Hollywoodize what actually we do as in our career, because maybe to some women it would be enticing, oh, the SWAT thing or the canine thing. But there are some women who don't want to join SWAT or canine. So for us, it's really important that when we're on our TikTok and we're on our Instagram, that we're talking about what really we do in law enforcement and how important it is that we do have representation. Right now in the city of Mesa, we're about 50% of our community is women. So we need to be more reflective of that. And so we do that on our social media by posting videos of women officers and the different jobs that we do to stay transparent with our community.
If I could just add to that, first, thanks, Alicia. I appreciate your work, but this is a plug for Epic Recruiting or other companies like them. You have to have a significant financial investment into recruitment in today's environment. And we decided to partner with Epic Recruiting. And if you get a chance to go to our website and see the videos that they've created for us, Alicia just lightly touched on this latest version that came out, which was really about focusing on the work-family balance. And the focus was on family, which what we know and we believe is one of the most important decision factors for some young women deciding to get into law enforcement with shift work and all the concerns. We've gotten great positive feedback from those efforts that Epic Recruiting worked with us on.
Thanks, Chief. And Alicia did put that link in the chat for anyone that wants to take a look at it. I can say that some of those recruiting videos that I've seen are some of the best that I've seen with respect to law enforcement agencies. So you have a really good team there. So next question, what is your typical turnaround on getting an applicant through the background phase? And how many people do you have dedicated to doing backgrounds? That's often where folks see a bottleneck in hiring.
Not enough people, for sure. Again, that's a challenge to try to appropriately staff. And, through the last 4 years, we struggled like every agency to get people through the door. And we've really worked hard to streamline the process, by introducing even our testing process. We used to have an in-person written testing process. Now we use a company it's virtual. We have a virtual application process called eSoft where they can do everything online. 5 to 6 years ago, we were still mailing things, and so it was just a time delay. We've also included recruitment efforts where our recruiting team, separate from our background investigators, are personally calling and reaching out to every applicant that comes through the door to get them through the process. But once they get through that initial application process, in Sergeant Jones, if you're on here, if I say this incorrectly, it's about 3 months. It could be as short as 45 days, but I would say up to 3 months. They are working to get as close to 45 days as possible. And I think right now we have a total of 9 full-time staff that work on backgrounds, and it's a split between professional staff and sworn staff.
Thanks, Chief. Another question, if a police trainee does not display behaviors that are conducive for success, do you not recommend them for the actual recruit training program?
Great question. The answer is yes. We've actually had this happen where the background process revealed that, hey, in this particular recruit situation, that they may not have the right maturity. So we were able to actually evaluate this individual in the 3 months leading up to the academy that the recruit was supposed to start. And at that point in time, we saw some behavior indicators that this individual was not ready for the academy yet at that age of, I believe it was 21 or 20, almost 21. So we made the decision to pull that recruit out of the academy, and we can do one of two things. We can hold them for the next academy to give us some time to get them to where they need to be. Or in this particular case, we have multiple jobs in our organization that they are now eligible for because we've already done the work of getting them through the background. And in this case, the individual went to our communication center and for the last year has been a successful 911 operator And I do believe when I met with her just recently, she's going to come back and will be entering our academy in maybe by the end of this year.
Okay, that's good to know. And some people just aren't ready. So, question came in, what are, whoops, let's see. What are your requirements for suitability test and psychological for professional staff and sworn?
If I could, I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
So Sabrina, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute, but I believe what you're asking about is the background exam and psychological exam. What are the components within both of those areas? Is that right? Okay. Well, in the essence of time, hopefully she'll come back in the chat, or we'll continue to go on to other questions. Has there been any consideration to discuss with Arizona Post their hiring qualifications and whether or not there's an opportunity to amend those qualifications to help Arizona agencies get additional qualified applicants through the door?
We have conversations with the director of AZ Post very regularly. It's interesting because his son is actually starting our academy here in the very near future. But those discussions go on, and as you know, because it's state run, it does take quite a bit of effort. It's got to go before the board, any recommendations. The one that we've worked on most recently is the state requirements for related to marijuana use. And an example of this, where we had a young recruit that just left the academy. I'm sorry, the U.S. military. And the day after he left, he decided to use marijuana for the first time in his life, the one and only time that he used it. And then 11 months later, he was at our doorstop wanting to be a police officer. When you looked at his entire file, he's like what you would consider an outstanding candidate, except our AZ Post rules at the time required a 2-year break from any marijuana usage. Understanding that 2 years ago, the Arizona state law says it's now legal for people at his age to use marijuana recreationally. I went before the board to request a waiver, and our attorney general sits on that board. And in that process, they unanimously granted the waiver and directed AZ Post to review just that marijuana requirement. And we expect in this year to see some changes, because that was very prohibitive, especially knowing that our young people are now inundated with using marijuana as legal. And then they test for law enforcement. They had no idea that now they can't have the job of their dreams. Additionally, we're working them on some of the physical fitness standards. We're actually beta testing a different fitness standard besides the POPAT that we currently use. And so hopefully within the next year or two, in working with them, we can change that across the board, and looking at what other states do. But if you can't wait for your post to make changes. Again, I talked about being intentional. Sometimes you got to have an agency that is willing to do the work, not just come up with the idea. And of course, we come up with ideas and then we end up beta testing it for post.
Thanks. And back to that question I asked a minute ago, if I understand it correctly, it's the suitability test that they're referring to is background and psychological exam. So more than 50% of this agency's folks fail those portions of the hiring process. So as a result, they continue to kind of spin their wheels in recruiting and then they don't move forward. So I guess my question would be for the folks that apply, how many actually, get hired, and what challenges do you see with either your background investigation or your psychological exam? You touched on a little bit of that, but if you could elaborate.
Yeah, Tara, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would probably say when somebody applies, the number of people that come through the door is whittled down to less than 10% of the original applicants actually make it through the process. Maybe it's 15%, but I think that's what it is. And that's through the application where they're initially screened for the minimum qualifications. Then as things come up in the background, as they make it through polygraph, are there issues? And then of course, our psychological and medical evaluations afterwards. I'm going to have to guess it's about 10 to 15% actually make it through and then are deemed to be good candidates.
Yeah, that's about right, Chief.
Yeah, and that's, during my time with the NYPD, we averaged about 1 in 10 that applied initially, and we defined that as filling out the application and taking or after they took the exam and then made it through the hiring process. And a number of those folks dropped out because they were no longer interested, and then some were disqualified. So a different question from the chat. Your next class is starting Monday with 34 candidates. Were all 34 hired as recruits several months before the academy after passing the background, or were only a few selected from the available group that passed your background investigation?
Good question. Actually, we started hiring them as soon as they finished the background. So obviously they weren't all hired in one group. What we try to do is once the prior academy starts, as we get available candidates for the next class successfully completed background, we will begin to hire them. So our next class, I believe, starts in September. And we'll start hiring them in June as soon as they get through the process. By the end of the academy, we had all 34 of them already in the pre-hire program.
Okay. So what would you say to someone that says Mesa is hiring women at the expense of men?
Well, first of all, I would say that's absolutely not true. And I have to tell you that even in our own organization, recently, the chief and I went and had this discussion with our command staff, because the challenge that I think we all have is communication. And, some of our frontline employees and first line supervisors, they see this 30 by 30 initiative, and we all have heard the rhetoric that we're hiring women over men or less qualified women over men. And we had to really work on ensuring that our commanders and lieutenants were pushing out actual factual based information about the initiative. The fact remains is we haven't changed our standards, but what we've really done is focused our recruitment efforts on bringing in this underrepresented group. And it goes all the way down to the things that we do with our youth, our Aspire program with our young ladies, getting them interested in the possibility of law enforcement or even fire department work. And it's bringing more of them through the door. They still have the same standards, the same background process, the exact same academy. Trust me, we're not turning away men. We're not turning away any recruit that's qualified. We're just working to see more women that are qualified into the door so we can get them through the process. I have the capacity for 54 people in an academy class. We have 34. We haven't turned anyone away.
So what were the different ways that you socialized 30 by 30 in the department when it started, or, throughout the course of time?
Yeah, I think honestly, we could have done a better job because across the country, we know that there's a misunderstanding about what it is. And we didn't address some of the rumors and discussions that were going. We put it out on social media. We had it on our webpage. The local media covered it, and we celebrated in our annual report, but we didn't communicate it down to our frontline employees. Understanding that 70 to 80% of recruits come from referrals from our own employees, we probably should have done that better on the front end. And that was why we went to our command staff and said, I need to make sure that each of you understand what the program is. More importantly, what it is not. Here's what we're doing, and I need you now to go down into your individual commands and have that discussion, and hopefully we can try to, you're never going to prove it to those that are going to doubt it, that you like I said, you can't argue with an idiot. And so you're always going to have folks in your organization that are going to have a certain feeling about whatever you're doing when it comes to diversity. But I'm finding that the majority of your organization, once they understand it, they have a better appreciation for it.
So Chief, and I don't want to monopolize the questions, but I will if people don't raise their hands and put them in the chat, because it's an incredible opportunity. And I was teasing you a little bit in the beginning about being our first sole male presenter, but really thinking about male allyship and what men in policing can do to support women in policing and women in the workforce more broadly. It seems to me that this is part of your job, so you have to do some of the work that you're doing, but you're also personally invested in supporting women in the workplace. So, how did you get to that point?
Well, I mean, if I could just open myself up for a little bit, obviously I have 3 daughters, and they're all of the age that they could be police officers or whatever they wanted to do in life. And so I really looked at things differently, just outside of work in general, on the opportunities I wanted for my daughters, and I wanted them to understand that, well, first they can do whatever they want. And so I wanted them to be exposed to people like Sergeant Gibbs and some of our other women that, can really model that as a possibility. And then it goes back to when I tested for lieutenant. We had a writing exercise as part of it, and it was, how do we recruit, basically candidates to match the demographics of our city. And this was way before this 30 by 30. This was back in 2012. And when I looked at our city demographics, the only area that really was significantly underrepresented were women. And that stuck out to me. And I don't think anybody really started to look at that back then. And so ever since I saw that myself, and I started to recommend that we focus our recruitment efforts, in that area, that's really been kind of important to me. Now, it's been years later that I finally got into a position that I think that I can help support that change. But that's really where it started for me. And honestly, it helps when you have not only a city that supports it, but a chief that supports it, and it really becomes part of our culture. But that's really kind of been the journey that I haven't, honestly, till you put people into the process that are doing the work, you're not going to have successes. And I have a great staff, both in recruiting and hiring, that really do an amazing job for us and are helping us be successful.
So I probably shouldn't ask this with some of your team on, but what's next?
Good question. I push them all the time to elevate and increase what they're doing. And so I'm not going to tell them what's next. I've got a staff that'll bring what's next to me, and I'm going to support it. And because they're the ones that actually, I think, are going to be implementing things. And it's hard when you do top-down initiatives. When you have bottom-driven initiatives that come up and we support it, I think we have success. So I'm going to continue to push them to push that needle even further over the next coming years.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. And before we wrap up, I'm going to share one more screen and give folks a brief discussion on some of what else Arizona is doing. Can everyone see that? So I just wanted to point this out because I think it's really something incredible that some folks in Arizona have done together. So they've formed a multi-agency coalition and set it up with 30 by 30. And it includes a number of people that I know that are on the call today: Apache Junction, Arizona State, Gilbert, Mesa, Phoenix, Queens Creek, Tempe, Tucson, Yuma, University of Arizona, Department of Liquor, MCSO, Pinal County. There's a number of agencies that are part of 30 by 30 that have banded together. And the purpose is multifold, but it's really to think about how to share information regionally about certifications, about compliance and training. One of the challenges, frankly, that we have with 30 by 30 at times is ensuring that all of our information, our agency representatives, is up to date and that people are connected to each other. So that's part of what the purpose of this group is as well. A big part of it is exchanging experiences, discussing the successes and challenges and how they've been able to move forward, get buy-in, and implement different processes and initiatives that are specific to 30 by 30 or that may be outside of 30 by 30. And one of the things that I've found with this group, it really has promoted collaboration and partnership for more visibility in the state in support of gender equity, and also more broadly, for 30 by 30. So it's been really helpful and encouraging for us to watch the evolution of this group and to think about what that means for the future of women in policing and for the future of what this looks like in Arizona in particular. One of the things that we often talk about is that the representation of women in policing is around 14% in the United States, and that's remained relatively stagnant over the course of time. But we also know that there's a number of other countries, Australia, the United Kingdom, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, I could go down the list, that they've achieved much more success with gender equity. And they are in the 20 to 35% range and have been for some time. So it really begs the question about what is the difference, and we know some of the more obvious ones that make policing more, that women are more interested in policing in other countries than they are in the United States. So part of what we talk about too is the international lens. But I just wanted to really say thank you, Chief, to you, to Mesa, your team, Tara Hall, Sergeant Gibbs, a number of other folks that are on there for the work that you're doing to advance women in policing, and then also to all of the other Arizona agencies that have teamed together to do this work. Happy to take another question or two if anyone has one, and if not, we'll close out for the day.
If I can just say, Tanya, thank you for letting us highlight Mesa PD and all the work at a national level for 30 by 30 and women in policing. So thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Chief. We'll close out for today. For those of you that want to watch the recording, it'll be available on our website in about a week, as well as the slides from the presentation. And if anyone wants to be in touch with the representatives from Mesa, just let me know and I'll be happy to make that contact for you as well.